What's the worst thing you unknowingly did as a child? I don't know if it's the worst, but I ruined my parents' romantic anniversary. I was around 7 and I woke up in the middle of the night because my stomach didn't feel well. So I went upstairs to tell my parents. When I opened their door, I remember there were candles, music playing, and when my mom saw me, she immediately pulled a blanket around herself. She asked me what I was doing up, and before I could even finish my sentence, I projectile vomited all over everything. As a young little sheethead, my favorite prank was to lock bathroom stall doors and then crawl underneath them and exit the scene. One time, my parents dragged me to Costco with them. I went to the biggest stall in the back of the bathroom, locked that sheet and scampered away with a grin. I ended up going back to the same Costco the next day because my parents had to return something. I went to the same stall and it was still locked. This time I actually had to take a sheet. I crawled under the door, only come face to face with an old guy looking at me like I was from another planet. I recoiled away so hard that I smacked my head on the bottom of the door and ran from that bathroom like I'd never run in my life. I crack myself up whenever I try to imagine what that guy was thinking when a 9-year-old tried to hijack his toilet. Probably not the worst, but the one I can think of off the top of my head. I live within a half hour of the US-Canada border, Canadian side. And back in the 80s and 90s and earlier, a lot of people would go over to the States to buy gas, beer, milk, etc. It was pretty much a Sunday tradition for us. One time when I was maybe 6 or 7, we were over there for the usual load of junk food etc. And my parents bought me a cap gun. Coming back across the border, the agents asked the usual questions about where we were, what we're bringing back. Dad lists off everything, except probably a lot of beer and tobacco, because smuggling that stuff was super easy back then. And when he finished, I pipe up in the backseat and say, "And a gun." Somewhat proud of my new toy. Well, turns out that's a surefire way to get your car searched. And your dad busted for smuggling beer. Who'd have known? Edit. Holy, this blew up more than I expected. I should mention that getting busted for smuggling didn't mean they hauled him off to jail. He just either lost the beer or had to pay a bunch of duty fees on it. Not as bad as it sounded, I guess. And beer isn't illegal up here. It was just way cheaper to go get it down there. My mom has had severe depression, and I wrote her a poem for Mother's Day when I was 8 that had lines like, "I love you even though you cry all the time." I was really proud because I thought it really showed how much I care, and I read it aloud to her. I didn't get the reaction I was expecting. Yeesh. I used to go around and proudly tell people that you weren't allowed to have parents when you pass a certain age. I think it was 25. I think I was 5 at the time. The weirdest part is my parents were in their 40s and my grandparents, except my mom's dad, were still alive. I feel terrible remembering it as an adult. I could lose my dad any week now and it terrifies me. I had a lot of medical issues as a child, and so we had a massive drawer full of my prescription meds. When I was 9 years old, a friend from school came over to my house. We played for a while before she told me that she had a stomachache. Capital I. Knowing just how to help, gave her some of my medicine for a similar issue. She got pretty sick, and I got a really long lecture about how we do not give our medications to other people. I still feel bad about that one. One time I put a penny in my parents' car's cigarette lighter socket. It was the 80s, so lighter sockets were all over the car, including the doors and the backseat. It completely drained the battery within a few hours, and it took the guy at the garage a few days to figure out what was wrong with the electrical system. Once when I was about 4, I sprayed a man driving by my house on his motorcycle with a water hose. I have no idea why I did it. I just remember that I was playing with the hose and he kept riding by over and over, and I just had an impulse and went with it. He didn't come by again after that, obviously. When my cousin and I were 5-6, we got hooked on this amazing hot chocolate at this hotel. The hotel had a bar in the middle of the pool, so you can drink it while you're sitting in the water, which made it even cooler. Our parents told us we couldn't have more. So we went to a random couple and asked them to buy us the hot chocolate. They did. And they babysat us until our parents found us. A few hours later. We didn't say anything about the hot chocolate since we didn't want to get in trouble. So the couple never got paid back. Looking back, I think they were probably some honeymooning couple and we forced them to babysit 2 bratty kids. TLDR, probably convinced a couple never to have kids. I was at a birthday party. Age 7. And there was this orange air freshener that smelled so good. So I sprayed it all over myself. And then I smelled really good. So all the kids started spraying it on themselves. Not 20 minutes later. All of us are crying and screaming because our skin is burning and turning red. There was something very irritating in the air freshener. I was about 7 when I made an enemy of my next door neighbor. I still don't see it as my fault that he had side chicks and side children and I didn't understand shit about that. When one of his assorted children came to play I was like I was playing with your brother the other week. What brother? Oh you know. The one your dad has with that other lady. Book smart street dumb. Was me. I messed up 2 computer monitors back in after school daycare in kindergarten. There were these magnet toys that were laying around and for some reason I had put it up to the monitor and thought it was so cool how they made rainbow colors on the monitor. Me and a friend continued to do it until we both got yelled at and that's all I can remember. I don't remember what happened after that but I'm pretty sure they stopped putting out the magnets. Edit. Damn I didn't expect so many people to have a similar experience to this. It's good to know that there was a degauss feature now because I thought I permanently ruined those things until now all mayo. When I was little I overheard my mom saying how my aunt chewed with her mouth open. Sometime later my aunt is in the car with my mom, myself and my sister. And I proudly yell out how my mom says she chews with her mouth open. It was terribly awkward and I'm glad I can only remember fragments of it. Another time I came home from school crying and in front of my mother and grandmother told my mom how at school everyone else has a great grandmother but I have a mean one. Didn't understand the concept and we laugh about it constantly now. When we were both 8. I gave my cousin a corn cob pipe I found in a drawer in the garage. And he put lawn clippings in it and smoked it. And had to be rushed to the hospital. Apparently my aunt and uncle had just chemically treated the lawn and he smoked a whole bunch of nasty pesticides and herbicides. I tripped a waitress carrying dishes by leaving a crayon on the ground. But my dad may have been lying to teach me a lesson about not leaving crayons on the ground in a restaurant. I was 5 and my brother was 8. I showed him where our mom was keeping the Christmas presents and told him it was okay to look. I promptly ran out and told on him. For what he tells me. The worst part was that my mom just tossed him this toy he wanted after she yelled at him. Was about 3-4 years old walking with my family at a massively busy mall. Saw a little person and yelled out loud to my mom. Thinking it was harmless. Look mommy. A midget. Needless to say my family was more than a little embarrassed. The first day I moved into my new house at 6 years old I was meeting the new neighbor boy who was a couple years older than me. We were out in his driveway talking about some stuff when his mom walked out and, for whatever reason, I instinctively smacked her as she walked by. My parents still bring up how embarrassing that was for her to come over and tell them what happened. Not me, but my brother, 20 years older than me, as a kid was house sitting for someone when he was like 7. Taking care of the dogs, cats, fish and a hamster or 2. He spilled something on a hamster, Kool-Aid I think, and he gave it a bath. Then tried to dry it off in the microwave so the family wouldn't know. To his credit, the hamster was dry. My grandparents used to have a timeshare condo in Florida. Basically an old person's community. My mom took me there when I was maybe 5-6. I would sit on the balcony and just shout, "Hey you're really old" at all the people that walked by. I've never been to Florida since. I dry humped the sofa while my parents watched in silent horror. I thought I was the first person to discover that rubbing my pen 15 on things felt good. Many pieces of furniture fell victim to my testing. I discovered that the sofa was the best and I had to show my parents. I couldn't keep this to myself. I told them to come to the living room. I had something amazing to show them. I didn't just sexually assault their couch. I was teaching a class on it, offering to let my dad have a go. They just stood there. It haunts me to this day. I have never asked them about it. They must have thought they were raising a sexual predator. Made fun of someone with cerebral palsy using canes to walk. I thought they were just walking funny on purpose and didn't know that they were handicapped. I still cringe thinking about when the teacher told me to stop and explained why that was wrong. I put a canned Miller Lite in my Pikachu lunchbox in the 2nd grade because I wanted to be the cool kid at the lunch table and impress my friends. Unfortunately, my mom saw how shady I was acting protecting my lunchbox and ended up opening it. She was livid. Till this day, she still brings it up. It's basically the go-to story when I bring someone new to the house. I decided I wanted to burn trash in the middle of the Texas summer, so my dumb little ass did just that. I just threw some cardboard boxes and sheet into this barrel on my property we always had. Figuring it would be contained, you know. I poured some lighter fluid in there from my dad's grill. Lit a match and boom. Up it went, and my weird child obsession with fire was quenched until the damn fire jumped out of the barrel and started racing towards the pine woods. It was around Huffman TX. Lots of pine trees. There was apparently a raccoon in there. I doused with lighter fluid and set on fire under the trash I was trying to burn. Well, I ended up burning up a good portion of trees behind my house before the firefighters came. Thankfully it wasn't that bad and our house didn't burn down, but it was the scariest moment of my life. I don't think I ever burned anything again. My heart was broken. I cried for days. I felt so damn bad for that raccoon. I told my mom I betrayed Steve Irwin because I hurt an animal really bad. I'm pretty sure I started writing a letter to apologize, but I was afraid he wouldn't forgive me, so pushed out. Every Christmas I'm haunted by one year when I was 8 that I begged to spend Christmas Eve at my maternal grandparents' house. My aunt and uncle are 1 year older and 2 years younger than me, respectively. So their house was fun. My dad paid for me to fly from Florida to Missouri to spend the holiday with him. Just for me to want to be with my grandparents. As a mom now, I know that probably gutted him. He passed away 10 years ago. So I can't even make it up to him now. I broke my parents up. I asked my mum if I could have dinner at my Aunt Christie's house again because she cooked my favorite pasta. Turns out mum didn't know who Aunt Christie was, which is because she wasn't really my aunt. She was the co-worker my dad was sleeping with. My uncle and his new wife came over to visit late one night when I was about 6. I was supposed to be in bed so the adults could enjoy visiting, but I was determined to stay up and see what was going on. So I asked my mom in front of everybody if I could have a snack before bed. Even though I'd never had bedtime snacks. My mom was strict about eating right. So of course she said no and told me to go back to bed. I decided to make a scene and lay on the floor begging for food. Saying I hadn't eaten in ages. That I was starving and asked for just one reason. My new aunt watched, horrified, as my mom stayed firm and dragged me back to bed as I fake cried and begged her not to beat me. I was a very skinny child due to illness. So my aunt probably thought I really was being abused. But the truth is that I had good parents. I was just a little shit sometimes. When I was about 6 or 7, we went to Palm Springs on some vacation. This was 98/99. When Pokemon was huge, mom wanted to do some American shopping and took me to a mall. One of the stores we went to was a bookstore. Well, I was in luck. In this store they were selling the Pokemon handbook that included Mew and TGP, which the original handbook didn't have. I showed it to my mom and begged her to buy it. However, considering I already had the original book, she said no. I was sad, but continued to look through it. Then we left the store and began doing window shopping on our way back to the rental car. The parking lot was all the way on the other side of the mall. When we finally got there, I tried to open the car door but noticed I couldn't. There was a book in my hand. I turned to my mom and showed her my accidental thievery. She looked at the book, then looked across the parking lot at the mall. Mom decided it was too far to walk. I got my stupid Pokemon book and became the first successful thief in my family. I was little and we were at my grandpa's funeral. Being only 6 or 7, I hardly understood what it meant for him to be dead, especially considering it was an open casket. In my mind, everyone was walking up to him and saying goodbye, and he was sleeping like when we saw him in the hospital. Little did I know. So when it was finally my turn to go up, my mom asked me if I was sure I wanted to see him. I said of course. And I ran up to my grandpa and yelled out "Grandpa," just like I did when we would go over and visit. It wasn't until he didn't reply and I felt his freezing cold clammy hands that I realized why people were crying. He was dead. Edit. Wow. Thank you all for all the kind words. The worst one was taking my mother's personal massager to school for show and tell as I was a fairly literal child, and that's what it said on the packaging. It wasn't obviously a marital aid as it was one of the more bullet options. However, my at the time female teacher knew exactly what that was and took it away from me and called my mother to let her know as delicately as possible what I had taken to school. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized what I had done. My mother gets a good laugh out of that one though, for sure. Edit. And now my most rated comment is about my mother's dildo. I'm sure she would be so proud. My mom came to kiss me goodnight when I was 9 or 10. And my lips were super uncomfortably chapped. So I licked my lips to moisten them. Unfortunately, I licked right as she kissed me. And she thought I tried French kissing her. And she slapped me really hard. I am 34 and haven't told her to this day. I unknowingly broke my arm when I was 4. My parents had no idea. I didn't complain much even though it hurt like hell. I wound up carrying my arm around with the other arm. Parents noticed me doing this but didn't know what to think. The break eventually healed this way, and when I went for a checkup, the doctor informed my parents that I had broken my arm. I casually called my stepmom a pussy when she asked me to kill a spider for her. I was maybe 7 or 8 at the time. I had been watching Tom and Jerry. I didn't even know what 6 was yet. I've never seen my father laugh himself to tears like that. I was with my mom over at her friend's house. We were out in the barn looking at their chickens. As we were going out, the neighbor guy shut the automatic garage door. And I thought it would be neat to do a sweet James Bond move and slide under the door as it was closing. Long story short, I got stuck under the door. And the guy had to lift it with his hands against the motor so I could slide out. I was a little older than I'd like to admit. I called it the wolf game. I'd stand halfway between my house and the woods and howl. And see how many wolves I could get to show up. My record was 3 before common sense kicked in. I should not have survived to adulthood, lol. Not me. But my older sister needed material to make something. I can't remember what it was. Some arts and craft thing. Anyway, she found my mother's wedding dress and decided it was the perfect material. So she cut a big square out of the dress. Luckily my mother is very easygoing and has never cared about material things that much. She was a hippie. And still is. So she was initially annoyed but pretty much just laughed it off in the end. I was really young and shared a room with my older brother. I remember one time I begged him to tie me to the bed frame because I was pretending I was a creature or something. My brother got really embarrassed and I couldn't understand why. I cringe when I think about that. When I was in the 5th grade, I had a male teacher who was kind of weird and who basically let me and my friends get away with anything because we were smart. I was not smart enough to know that teasing my mom for said such as crush on her would mean an all-out screaming match between her and my stepdad. This fight lasted for 5 more years. He thought she was cheating on him because I had said my teacher had a crush on her. I was 5 years old and the daycare I went to was in someone's house. The owner's mother stayed with her because she recently had a stroke. As a result of said stroke, her tongue was always slightly protruding out of her mouth. 5-year-old me thought she was sticking her tongue out at me to be rude. So I returned the favor by very dramatically sticking my tongue out at her while shaking my head. Interestingly enough, no one was in the room but us, and the mother couldn't speak, so I didn't get into trouble. Up until I was around 6 or 7. Whenever my family and I were heading out of a restaurant, and I noticed that my parents were forgetting cash on the table, I would always make sure to grab it and slip it back into my mom's purse. I didn't know tipping was a thing. And it's not until I made a comment about how they were always leaving money lying around at restaurants, and how I always had to be the one to keep an eye out for it and make sure they didn't forget it, that they realized what was going on. And I learned. I cost a lot of waiters their tips. When I was around 3 or 4 years old, my family lived in a rented townhouse. We had a small dog that was not very well house trained and would frequently poop and pee in the carpeted house. Supposedly my parents were planning to move and painstakingly cleaned the carpets to remove any evidence of the dog going to the bathroom in the house in order to get their security deposit back. Obviously, being so young, no one clued me in on the situation. On the day the landlord came to inspect the house, I was playing outside in the yard. He stopped to say hello to me before knocking on the door, and I allegedly said something to the effect of, "Hi. My dog Frankie goes potty in the living room." The landlord immediately went inside and began ripping up the carpeting and saw all the stains underneath. My parents did not get their security deposit back. I almost let my younger stepbrother drown. I, 8 years old, was supposed to be holding his 2 years old hand while we were at lake fishing. He yanked out of my grasp and took off full sprint into the water. My stepmom had to go diving in after him. They blamed it on me, but as an adult with kids about that same age, I would never trust a 8-year-old to watch a toddler around a body of water. So it's their fault.